Welcome to a presentation by the Australian Delphi Users Group that was shown at our 2023 Symposium. Our forums provide a resource where you can ask questions and receive answers about Delphi. There are many experienced Delphi users who watch our forum and provide helpful answers to your questions. You can also show your knowledge by answering questions that others may have. Attendees of the symposium have access to a 2023 symposium category, which is where you will find information related to this year's symposium. This will include the videos, links, and content provided by the presenters. The Australian Delphi Users Group has regular local meetings in Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, Brisbane, and Adelaide. Many of these meetings can be watched online via Zoom. Watch the meetings category in the forums for announcements of upcoming meetings, information you need to know to go to them, and what topics are going to be discussed at the meeting. We would like to encourage everyone who is able to attend our meetings to learn and network and meet up with other developers like you. We are always looking for people to present topics, and we are sure there are many people watching who have unique expertise that others would be interested in knowing about. This year's presenters are Jeffrey Smith, Jason Tolley, Jon Aasenden, and David Millington. We would like to thank our sponsors for supporting this year's symposium. We would also like to thank our prize donors who have provided us with excellent prizes for attendees to win. Now, without any further ado, here is one of our symposium presentations.
So, first, thank you for inviting me a second time. I feel honored that you wanted to have me present this. So I'm just going to jump straight into it. I've divided the presentation into two parts. So for those of you who didn't see the first one, I will run through the sort of standard introduction to QTX. And then the second half of the presentation will be pre-recorded. So that will be a video that I play. So if you have questions, then I think maybe the first half of the presentation is the place to ask them, or after the presentation is finished. So yeah, let's just dive into it. So Quartex Pascal, the first version is codenamed Mount Kailash. As you probably know, Delphi has the sort of the Greek theme, with Athena being sort of the patron saint that used to be depicted in the Delphi startup picture, and also the background in the IDE. I have more of an affinity towards the Indian artwork and mythology. I find that to be just as interesting as the Greek mythology. So instead of going for some sort of Greek deity or something like that, I figured that Mount Kailash could be an interesting thing, which is the Indian version of Mount Olympus. So if you're wondering about the name and the background, that's where that comes in. So I'm going to have a few slides that are more or less the same that I had last time. I've included these since there can be people who are attending who hasn't seen the first presentation. So my name is Jon Aasenden. I work for a company called DIPS, which is a medical company in Norway. I used to work for Embarcadero. I was the SC for Europe, Asia, and North Africa. So I had the pleasure of traveling around a little bit and talking to different Delphi groups here and there. I had 2 wonderful years with Embarcadero. When it comes to background, I started quite early. 10 years of age, I got the Commodore 64, and that I haven't been to soccer practice ever since. And then I advanced further onto the Commodore Amiga, and eventually, the normal PC, x86. And that's when I sort of got involved with Delphi. I enjoy writing compilers and parsers, and I'm really interested in IoT. these single boards like Raspberry Pi, for example, that allows you to pretty much create anything. Before this project, I had a similar project called Smart Mobile Studio. I left that company in 2018, I think it was, and then joined Embarcadero. I have an MVP status, and most of you probably know me from my Delphi groups or my developer groups, Delphi developer, C++ developer, and so forth. And there is now also a Quartex developer group, which currently is only for backers, but it will be opened for everybody at the moment version 1.0 is released. So yeah, I have a few decades with development behind me. So what is the point of Quartex Pascal? To make a long story short, it has to do with trying to turn JavaScript into a rapid application development ecosystem. Basically, that you can write normal Object Pascal code that we know from Delphi and Free Pascal, for example. Some syntax differences, obviously, but more or less plain Object Pascal. And then you can compile that to JavaScript and write web applications, or should I say, you can approach web development in the same way that you would approach writing a Windows application in Delphi, for example. There are a few benefits to going with JavaScript. It's virtually everywhere today, not just browsers or server-side code. You also find it in the IoT infrastructure. You can buy embedded boards and microcontrollers that actually have built-in JavaScript support. So JavaScript is no longer a browser toy like it used to be. It has more or less come of age, and I don't think there's a language available on the planet that has seen as much research and development as JavaScript. And it has to be because the browser needs it, security and stuff like that. It has quite good performance. JavaScript used to be interpreted, which was very slow. That is a long time ago. Today, when you load a website, the JavaScript is converted into bytecodes. It's parsed, turned into bytecodes, and then the bytecodes are further turned into machine code. So the performance that you have today on JavaScript is light years ahead of what it used to be in late 90s, early 2000s. It's a completely different ballgame. Hardware and platform agnostic, meaning that you get sort of the same behavior. If you write some JavaScript that works on a Mac, it will also work on Linux and Unix and Windows and so forth. So we have the same platform agnostic approach. Lightweight, flexible, versatile, and as expected, it's popular with young developers. It's kind of what BASIC used to be in the old days when sort of BASIC was built into the system. That was sort of the first thing that everybody learned, both at school and I would imagine even high school. I mean college. So mostly young developers seems to have adopted JavaScript wholesale. But of course, there are seasoned developers as well. You simply cannot get away from JavaScript today. It's a long time ago since all you had to learn was Delphi or C++, and then you were set. Today you have to speak or write a few languages. It's also become quite popular to use JavaScript and basically normal web technology and turn that into a mobile application. Performance is pretty good. Sometimes there can be a few bottlenecks. There are still a few regions where native code has an advantage over this type of approach, this type of bytecode and further turned into machine code. But all in all, I think there are more mobile applications written in JavaScript and things like React framework than actual native mobile applications written in Delphi or C++ or something like that. Again, identical behavior, like I mentioned, and it covers the front end and the back end, and also system services. So it has sort of full stack. You can write the whole system infrastructure with it. There are a few downsides to JavaScript. The syntax leaves a little bit to be desired, especially when you have functions that return objects that have functions that return data structures. So it's very easy to make mistakes. Sitting down to write a large web application, which includes the server, using nothing but JavaScript, is typically time-consuming and fiddly. And the first thing that's going to hit you when you start investigating JavaScript is that there's simply too many packages, too many frameworks that are competing. That it can be really confusing to get into that community and that type of development. The sheer number of packages is just overwhelming. I think the npm package manager, which is used by JavaScript developers, I think it has something like 1 million packages or something like that. It is absolutely staggering the amount of things that are available. So trying to write large web applications, and with large web applications, I mean, for example, sitting down writing an invoicing system which has potentially 50 or 100 forms, that turns out to be quite difficult to maintain. Also, JavaScript objects doesn't have a VMT, a virtual method table, that Delphi and C++ has. So common things like overloaded methods, virtual and abstract, those kind of things simply doesn't exist. When you create an instance of a JavaScript object, you're basically cloning a data structure, and that data structure is the same data structure system that is behind JSON. So it's a bit heavy to work with if you're going to write clean JavaScript classes and objects. Yeah, it's time consuming. And this is where Quartex Pascal comes in as an alternative to TypeScript, for example, or plain JavaScript. And this is a community-funded project. It's 100% Delphi with as little dependencies as possible. The compiler is based on Delphi WebScript, which is maintained by Eric Grange. I had the pleasure of working with him for 2 years, where we sort of worked together to add the missing pieces so that DVS would work well with JavaScript. JavaScript has a more flamboyant nature, if you like, while Object Pascal tends to be a little bit strict. Everything has to be defined and everything needs a type and so forth. But so sort of blending those two worlds required a bit of work. So when it comes to the compiler parts, that is Eric Grange and Delphi WebScript. So yeah, you can download that and have a look at it if you like. And the whole point here is that you can write Object Pascal code and it emits JavaScript. So Eric, he extended the compiler with a so-called code gen or code generator, which takes the abstract symbol tree, which is created by the compiler, and then converts that into JavaScript. So it's kind of an alternative to TypeScript, but we try to sort of stick to the Delphi way of doing things, or the Object Pascal way of doing things. So having a compiler, a lot of people think that that's sort of the main thing that you need. If you write the compiler, then that's sort of the big thing. But it turns out that the compiler is just one part that you need. Just having a compiler isn't really useful unless you have an extensive RTL. So you need a runtime library. You need classes that sort of simplify all the functionality that exists in JavaScript, in the JavaScript runtime. And then there's also a ton of things that simply doesn't exist in JavaScript that has to be implemented directly. So I've spent a long time implementing the runtime library. You can take something simple like converting a string into bytes, for example. Things like that, having a codec system. Also turning normal data types like integer and int64, etc., into bytes. There are no easy ways of doing that out of the box in JavaScript. So those are things that have been added and implemented in QTX itself. So you have a huge runtime library with a ton of functionality that makes it easy to work with, as easy as possible. And the RTL covers Node.js, which is the server-side version of JavaScript. It's a script engine that you can execute from the shell, a bit like Python, for example. Except it runs Node.js JavaScript, and you can also run WebAssembly. On the other hand, you have the visual aspect of this, which deals with the browser. And I had to come up with a component structure that sort of spanned the whole wingspan from non-visual components all the way up to visual T-custom control like components, and then further implement the standard controls that we all know, like T-button, T-list box, T-label. All of those things had to be written. So there's a lot of time that has gone into getting that to work properly and to be fast. And again, the target, this is a platform agnostic system, so you can target Windows, Mac OS, Linux, all the standard platforms. The most interesting for me is probably the embedded boards, because it allows you to build systems that would otherwise be extremely costly. For example, NAS boxes, network active storage. I'm sure some of you have an NAS box in your house, like Synology, for example. And as you know, you can install. You have a web interface for Synology, and then you can install and run applications. You have popular applications like Plex, which is sort of Netflix, your personal Netflix. So if you have movie files, etc., you can organize them and you can watch them then from your television, from PlayStation, from your PC, everywhere. There's a ton of applications for Synology, for torrent clients, pretty much anything you can imagine. And all of it runs from a browser. And part of the goal here is to make it as simple as possible to write those kind of system, which is sort of like your own cloud system, if you like. So you get the benefits of both sides. You get an infrastructure that is very compatible with Delphi, or at least it has all the known concepts, like a component class, like a non-visual component, T component, and visual components. The only difference is that we call them widgets instead of components. So TQTX widget is more or less the same as T custom control in Delphi. So there are a few naming differences, to avoid issues there. So here we come to the IDE. This will probably be more interesting for those of you that saw the previous presentation. At the time, the IDE was just getting started. I was focusing more on the fundamental aspects of an IDE, things like background compilation, extracting procedure help, syntax help, and things like showing showing the parameters, parameter help, these kind of things, code suggestions and so forth. So we spent a good deal of time implementing those features, and also an easy to maintain object-based code base for having multiple files opened. Also a unified filing system, so that the IDE actually doesn't know or care where the data comes from. When you open a file, it doesn't know where it comes from. So that we have a sort of an underlying system, a file system that deals with all of this. And the benefit is that you don't have to write the same code twice. I mean, one thing is opening a file directly. Another thing is, generated in memory files that the IDE operates with. So with a unified filing system in the background there, all of that is solved. So yeah, it's come a long way, as you probably can see if you remember the previous IDE. So I'm going to show you a video of this quite soon. Visual components, you have the component palette that you can see on the right here with TQT's button, checkbox, color picker, and so forth. And these are drag and drop. So in the form designer, you can simply grab these and drag them over to the form and position them. There are a few differences, because you have to remember that HTML is actually a document format. So the design and layout, a widget can support multiple layouts. In Delphi, we're used to absolute positioning. So if you position a button at 10.10, it will be at position 10.10, in pixels, absolute positioning. But the browser supports a ton of different layout modes. So we have support for that as well. Next, we come to the project types. It made sense to implement different project templates, I guess you can call them. We operate with something called an application model, which is the same as T application in Delphi, except that our application model deals with how windows and forms are presented. So we have, for example, the dynamic that you can see in the middle of the screen there. This is a top-down typical website model. So the forms that you create are stacked on top of each other like a normal web page, so that you can scroll, downwards. We have another one called tab dynamic, which is a tab-based one, where you literally have a tab that you can sort of click your way through and have different pages, different forms then on each tab. You also have windowed, which, like the name says, imitates normal forms or windows then that you can move around the display. There is also another model called boxed, and this is suitable for either if you want to create a small application that you want to put into an existing website, so that it a bit like an old Flash animation, for example, or some banners that slowly scroll into view, for example. So you want to have it boxed so that it doesn't interfere with the rest of the web page. That model also works really well for mobile applications, since forms are contained within a region, and then they can scroll in and out just like an iPhone does it, sliding forms in from the right and out from the left and so forth. You also have shell applications, Node.js based applications that you can see on top there. So we have a couple of prefabricated project types: HTTP server, shell application, UDP server, and so forth. And these can be seen as sort of fundamental projects that you can inherit out from. So if you want to create your own project type, you can simply right-click on these and clone templates. And then you can give it a new name, and you can change it, and then simply store it to the template folder, and it will show up here then with a new name. So that can be a bit time saving. I was quite unsure where to put this slide, but I felt I had to mention it. Kevin Bond is probably no stranger to Delphi developers. He's written several books for education. And I was, over the hill when he told me that he was writing a book about QTX, which is meant as an introduction. This will be suitable for people who haven't, worked with JavaScript or QTX before. He will, of course, focus on mostly on the Pascal side, I think. Yeah, I haven't received an overview of the chapters, but considering his other books, I think it's going to be really good. So I felt I need to mention that. Next up is the cloud platform. I've already talked a little bit about this, but it goes a lot deeper than you might think. So if you looked at some of the videos that I posted about QTX, the purpose of QTX is to have a complete infrastructure for different types of applications. These applications models that I've been talking about, and one of those is quite huge. It's actually a complete cloud system, like comparable to Synology, their entire system, where you have a system that allows for the deployment of large web applications. And this is shaped to behave and express itself like a normal desktop, like Windows. You have icons, you can select icons, you can double click on them. You have an application tab. You can open and write applications specifically for this desktop. And this provides all the infrastructure that we're used to in Delphi, like file system access, unified file system access. You have user accounts. You have security context. So you can look at that as sort of like the foundation. So if you want to create your own NAS box or your own intranet, or perhaps you have an invoicing system and you want to move that to the browser, then this will function as a ramp. This gives you all the features that you sort of expect from a desktop. File system being one of them. Also chat between people that are logged into the same system. You can share files with each other, those kind of things. But the power of the desktop system is really that it simplifies writing large web applications, like an invoicing system with 50 forms, for example. So I'm going to show you some of this later. So this is a snapshot of the prototype before we sort of dived into QTX. I actually started on the desktop system as a hobby project while I was still developing, working on Smart Mobile Studio. But as the more elaborate the desktop became, the more I realized that the RTL would have to be significantly improved, because Smart Mobile Studio, as the name says, was designed for mobile applications. It wasn't designed for something as big as this.
Features that an IDE needs.
But I implemented a prototype, and I think a lot of people have seen that perhaps on YouTube,
those kind of things.
with
And
games
basically
playing
build a structure that we can easily expand.
On the left here we have some icons, folders,
source code,
and various applications that you can start. So I focused on some of the like old games and music applications and things like that.
The most obvious, of course,
those are very
here,
demanding. They demand
we have an RSS feed from the website.
The system can host and run
so you can
those,
sign up there and have a look at the forum, for example. It's just getting started, so there's not like hundreds of posts there, but there are some, and everybody's welcome to post and ask questions and things like that. So this is actually a live RSS feed from that website. So I load that up and parse it. This entire menu that you see here, with the logo and everything is actually written in Qtix itself. It's a small project. So this is basically just a web browser that shows the menu. The most obvious change is, of course, that we now have support for Delphi themes. So you can sort of style the IDE as you wish. If you prefer lighter colors, you can use that. If you prefer, darker skins, you can do that. There's also a preview here that will, render so that you get some idea of what it's going to look like. And when you change these, you also have to change the configuration of colors. So the bunker gray, which comes with the backer builds, is for darker themes, and there's one called bunker light. These will be renamed, of course, when we sort of release the system, so that they're a bit more intuitive. Yeah. So I guess we can open up a little example. I had one called simple test or something like that. Test. Tiny demo. There we go. Okay. So this is the form designer that has changed quite radically. I actually don't remember if we had the form designer active the last time. I think we did, but it was very primitive and just getting started. As you can see, we don't render the actual HTML. We use these sort of representative boxes, and then as you can see, we have a nice mouse over that explains, what this widget is. In this case, it's list box, shows the class type, and also the RTL unit where this widget is defined. And you also have things like, creation order, which has to do with, the set index, sort of a deck of cards, the way that HTML does this. So yeah, it's the form design has become really functional. So you can do a lot of cool stuff with it. But getting it to the point where we have things like event handling, that we're so used to this in Delphi that everything just works out of the box, that when you're suddenly faced with a system that don't necessarily have that, you become less productive. So getting delegate support is really important. So that is in place here. Now, unlike Delphi events are procedural events, so you simply add an event handler. JavaScript operates with something called delegates, which is an event object, an object that represents the event and that has a procedural handler attached to that. So it's almost the same as Delphi, but it's just one what can we say, one object in between. The benefit of delegates is that you can have as many delegates as you like. So if you have, like this button, for example, if I would like to have 2 mouse click delegates, 2 handlers, and those will execute in the same sequence that you add them. So I can just click add delegates, and then I get this list over compatible delegates events. So widget writers or component writers will have to define what widgets support what delegates. So there's a ton of standard delegates, and if there's something custom, for example, if you write a cool new component, then you have to implement a delegate object for that, or a delegate class. So those will show up here. So I can actually add as many mouse click delegates as I like. So now I have a new one there. Just like in Delphi, the code is added automatically, unless it already exists. So let's see, show message, hello world. If I double click on this one, it will go down to the handler that I already had, before I added a new one. So okay, yeah, let's see, I can just save that. Here are also a couple of delegates that has been defined for a text box. Keyboard press down and keyboard press up. So let's compile and execute. Now, as you can see, this is the windowing model. I had an early version of that the last time I presented. So now that we have delegates, as you can see, that fired. So one of the delegate handlers will add the text to this list, and then I had, a second delegate handler that would just add it, which simply invokes a message box. So delegates work more or less exactly the way that event handlers do in Delphi. So that's pretty neat, and it took a lot of time to get that to work properly. Because one thing is getting a set of events to work, but when you suddenly have user-defined event objects, delegate objects, then suddenly you need a little bit more infrastructure around it. But yeah, it works great. So let's see. Code suggestion has been optimized quite radically. So now we have color separation. We have icons that helps you tell them apart. I also had some issues with scope, the methods that are visible from the point where you activate this. Those have been fixed. We now have, full scope. It also deals with partial classes, which is a nice feature that Delphi sadly lacks, but which is quite common in C# and also QTX. So that's nice. And of course, parameters. Yeah, parameter hints. So that's cool. Next up is drop zones. For example, since we're not rendering the HTML live, there's no real way to tell which one of these is a parent or can be a parent, or, a container like a panel or the form itself, and for example, something that can't host a child widget. So there's a difference between containers and non-container classes. But telling that apart visually has been, quite annoying at times because, there's been no visual feedback on it. This is partly why I have, the mouse over to make it easier to sort of tell what widget is this. Just hover over it and you can see the class immediately. But let's show the new drop zones. So I now added a TQTX panel. This is a container, of course, that can contain child widget. And let's go back and grab a button. And when I hover over a container, you can see that it highlights the container itself, the container border. And this is really useful because it can be difficult to sort of know where does it attach. For example, in the previous form designer I implemented, if I dropped, for example, a button here, it would actually attach to the form behind this list box. So it was a bit confusing, but yeah, I think this works quite well. So it's drag and drop all the way. I'm just going to delete that since we don't really need to have it. Next up is the protocol designer. I think I talked quite extensively about the message system that is sort of baked into the RTL. Long story short, there's a lot of message handling within HTML. For example, if you have a WebSocket server and you have an HTML website and you want those two to talk together, then it's okay to be able to send messages asynchronously back and forth. But that means that you have to establish, a standard that is flexible, especially if you have messages that will be further delegated from the server to let's say a background service that is running on the server machine, and then the response should be routed back to whoever called it. So it took a while to design a system that would be flexible yet small enough to get that to work. And this is where the Ragnarok protocol system comes in. So instead of having to sit and manually type these classes, because they have to be implemented in a special way since they're serialized to JSON, it's a text-based message format. I decided that it would be a good idea to implement a visual designer. So here we can define our own data types. You can have as many as you like. Each data type can have their own fields, which of course are typed once again. And I can also, for example, if I create a new data type now, I can add a field, and then I could also pick my own user-defined data types there as well. So data type 1 is defined up here, and we can use that in data type 2, for example. We can have as many messages as we like. Again, the same field system, and here you can pick the data types. So when I click build, we get a Pascal file. So the IDE will actually pick up this one and notice that, hey, it's a protocol file. Let's convert that to Pascal classes that you can use. So now suddenly we have a ton of classes that are automatically generated by the IDE. So I have a little bit more work that needs to be done with this message system because there are differences between, for example, some of the infrastructure you need between Node.js and the browser. I mentioned that messages are asynchronous, and that means that you need an object that sort of keeps track of what have I sent, and when it gets a response, it needs to be able to look up and say, oh yeah, I sent that a message earlier, this is the response, this response should be delivered to so-and-so procedure in your code. So you need one of those and a couple of other small classes. So I need to finish this part, and then you can just click what you need, and it will generate that for you. And I think that's quite smooth. So these messages can be used between client and server, and also between the running web page and a web worker, which is I guess it's the closest thing to a thread that you can get. So you can have as many web workers in the background, which is a completely separate process in the browser. Web workers also work on Node.js, which is really cool because you can do a lot of background processing and take full use of the CPU cores you have and things like that. So yeah, so I think Ragnarok is going to be really nice, and it's going to be how can I say it, efficient. It's going to be easier to write client server software. And when you're writing client applications and you already have a service, you have written the server, for example, a WebSocket server, and you sit down to write the client, it's also nice to have pre-execute script and post-execute script. So this is basically a shell execute that should be executed when you click compile and run, and when you close the browser, it will execute this one. And this is where we get into the process manager systems that JavaScript, that Node.js sort of depends on. There's one called PM2, Process Manager version 2. And the only job it really has is to make sure that if your Node.js server goes down, it will automatically bring it up again. And you can also fine-tune it to start your services, your JavaScript services, when the computer boots. So you have things like this. So this will now tell PM2 to start my background service, my background server. And then when I close the browser, I can do the opposite, so to speak. So that's handy. Other than that, the IDE has seen quite a bit of polishing, small bugs, small mistakes that have been here and there that we have sort of fixed in their hundreds. There's always, some small tweak or some situation. You guys are developers, you know what it's like. I can't really go through all of them, but I guess we had a search dialog the last time we looked at this. Now we have a fully implemented search and replace, which works really good. We also have pre and post execute scripts. I mentioned those, and file change notification. So when you open a project, and keep in mind that projects are folder based, so there's a full folder that represents your project. The IDE will set up a file notification thread that sort of watches the file system for changes. So if I open up a file or change a file and the IDE doesn't recognize that, hey, I did this, then it will present you with a dialog. Do you want to reload this? So and so. Bit of fine tuning that I need to do there still, but at least it's in place. So yeah, that's those are the IDE changes. Package support. I think we talked about that last time as well. The only thing that is left now that I'm working on is package configuration manifest. A JSON file that basically describes version info, dependencies, if it depends on other packages, etc., so that you don't get version conflicts. And you can also then have packages who depend on other packages, and the whole standard shabam. And packages are just normal zip files. You take all the stuff that your components need, and you put that in a zip file, and you rename it to PKG, which is package. And then you can just copy that into the packages folder, and the IDE will load it when it starts. Components will be registered with the palette that you see here, and if you have a glyph, a graphic, an icon, then that will show up for the widget if you have registered it. So yeah, but component writers will take care of that bit. So yeah. When it comes to RTL changes, there has been a ton of changes and evolvements. The last thing I added was tool type support. I actually tried to use a JavaScript, sort of a prefabricated system, but it was extremely complex the way that they had done it. And I found a super elegant way of doing it myself. So all widgets can now have a show hint and a hint property. So that's nice. I've also added touch delegate support. So you now have mouse, pointer, and touch, individual events, delegate events that you can use. I do suggest that you stick to the pointer events, since those basically cover all input methods. So and it's easy to read the properties and determine if this is a mouse click or a touch or whatever it may be. Yeah. WebSocket classes has been added for both the document object model and Node.js. So you can spin off the WebSocket anytime you like. But I guess the biggest news is the desktop application model. That is by far also the most complex application model. So this project is huge, so it takes a little while to load. There we go. And let's compile and run that. Voila, we have a desktop, including icons and icon selection, which is nice. But I'm just going to start this in a full browser, because the built-in browser in QTX is basically meant for smaller projects. It lacks a few of the features that, the more advanced features. It's meant as an embedded browser for, being able to test the lowest common denominators. So a full browser is a good thing. So the last time I showed you, the windowing model, we didn't really have form support. Form support being, the form designer, where you can sit and, graphically design your forms, and then those forms will show up as windows. And you can, of course, choose which windows should be created at runtime. And you can also create them manually, like I've done here. I have two types of windows. This is a normal form, but there's another one as well, which swaps out the content region, this region here inside the window, swaps that out with an iframe. And that means that you can load external websites or, a separate QTX project, for example, and have that running inside a window. So let's look at something a bit more advanced. So I have a friend of mine who is an exceptionally good JavaScript developer, and he has created a couple of really, really cool programs. So this is a full graphical application. Excuse me. It's not Photoshop. It's meant for pixel artwork, like creating icons and glyphs and things like that. So it's pretty cool. It's based on a popular application back in the 80s, late 80s and early 90s called dPaint, Deluxe Paint. This was, I think it was Electronic Arts that produced this. It was super popular both on Windows, Atari, and the Commodore machines. So this is a good example of something that you then can create and offer to your customers. So if you use this system, this application model, base your website on that. You can add like a login dialog, etc., so that people have to log into your system, and then they have access to quite advanced features. I can show you an even more advanced application. Once again, this is a friend of mine, great JavaScript developer that has created this. And this is a full music program. You can actually sit here and you can punch in musical codes. I think also there is MIDI support. And all of it is, pure JavaScript. So you can run it in the browser anywhere. So yeah, it's pretty neat. I was actually surprised at the speed of this. Great speed on it. And you can load music from various online repositories. I have no idea what I'm doing right now because I haven't browsed these so much, but say top rated in comments sounds nice. Yeah, let's try that. Okay, that was a bit techno. Yeah, but I'm sure you get my point. You can do some pretty amazing stuff. And since this is modeled on the old Amiga system, this sort of a visual inspiration there, the blue windows and the colors, I felt it was right to do a wrapper for the UAE emulator. I think it stands for Unix Amiga Emulator or something like that. So that is capable of running old 90s and 80s 68K applications in the browser. So let's see. I think I had it there. Yeah. And this is a wrapper around a WebAssembly system, so it's amazingly fast. I can't really tell the difference between this and the native C-based application in the UAE, running that on Windows. So let's load in some Amiga stuff that we can start. So this is a demo that I think it won a demo competition a few years back, and it runs completely smooth. And you have good control as well over things like file system and input sources, joystick, whatever. Amiga was, famous for gaming. So the point of this isn't that you can sit and play around with Amiga demos. The point is that if it's capable of running this smoothly at 60 frames per second, then it sure can present, business information, spreadsheets, all of that. So yeah, this is the beginning of a cloud system that I've been talking about for quite some time. Soon I will activate, the file systems here. So when you double click on one of these disks, it will talk to the background services, and you will actually be able to access the file system. Yeah, and you can mount things like Dropbox, Google Drive, those kind of things, and basically work with files just like you would under Windows. So that is suddenly, quite useful. For example, if you want to make your own NAS box, like Network Active Storage, then you can do this. You can buy a Raspberry Pi, for example. You can install this system, and then you can access your NAS through the browser, and you have a full desktop. You can copy files, you can move files, you can play videos, you can do all the stuff that you normally would do. So the hope is to create sort of a team system where people who work together can access the same desktop, they can have access to the same applications, all of that. So even though the UAE here is quite useless for business purposes, it is a really good test, to see the type of performance you can expect to get. So I think this is just the website. Once again, I've continued with the Amiga theme. I'm sorry about this for those of you that don't, have a background with this, but again, it's purely to be able to see how well does this work. Stress tested it a little bit. So yeah. So the desktop application model is work in progress. I'm still working on it. There are, a few things that need to be added, especially when it comes to security. I want to have something like, Android context security. I think that is a good thing to get that in place, early, so that it's not something you just, sort of tack on at the end. And this will be a fully working cloud system. And it will be implemented as a project type. So if you then, new project, new cloud, and it will clone out all the background services, everything you need, and you have access to the full source. You can go in and change and basically do whatever you like with it. And like I mentioned the last time, the look and feel of this can be changed. It's a normal CSS file. So if you know your way around CSS and HTML, you can go in and change, the color and make it look like Windows, for example, or some other design that you find more appropriate. So that's pretty cool. Yeah. A few other smaller things. Support for Shadow DOM, which is a JavaScript system for components, reusable components for JavaScript developers. I don't really see how much use we have for it since we have, the QTX RTL. I don't really think we're going to need it, but I have added support for it. The same also with synchronized widgets. Synchronized, that means that there is a tiny snippet of code that is injected into it that sort of waits until the widget is fully created and all the child widgets are also fully created, and then it informs you that, hey, it's ready for use. Otherwise, you will have to sort of use, the wait for features, the wait for functions that the RTL has in order to keep track of when things are ready to be used. That's the downside of an async system, that it's not always linear. It's close, but it's not always. So you can simply inherit from a synchronized widget class instead of the normal TQTX widget, and voila, problem solved. Then the constructor and the object ready, etc., will fire in a specific sequence that you can trust. Other than that, there's a ton of packages that is coming out. I have a backer that is exceptionally good at this. He's created a ton of packages. So Angular, Vue, Lemonade, Quill, jQuery user interface, Leaf Map, Metro UI are some of the typical frameworks that people use, and those have been wrapped as packages. So you will have drag and drop components based on that. I added a new package called Quill, which is a popular RTF editor, a bit like WordPad, if you can imagine that. And again, drag and drop, you can just drop it on the form and voila, you have a RTF editor. And then you have a second editor package called, what's it called again? Ace, which is more or less the same as SynEdit for Delphi. So that has already been wrapped. I just need to register the classes properly. And this was not made by me. It's like I said, I have a really cool backer that has created a ton of packages. So he deserves the credit for that. Yeah. So the final bits and pieces. What is left before we can release this? And I guess we have 3 tasks left. The first is the package configuration manifest. I mentioned that briefly. That is a JSON file that informs the IDE about versioning and dependencies and so forth. That has to be finished. Then I have the Ragnarok class generator that needs a few tweaks. And finally, I want to have a clean HTML editor, normal document editor, RTF. And I've been lucky enough to be sponsored by RichEdit, which provided a free copy of RichEdit that we can use in the IDE. So that is going to be really nice. So really handy when you, for example, you have static web pages that just contain, images and text, and then you can load that into a more dynamic presentation, I guess. You can have components and then load the finished documents into a component and size and scale and do stuff with it. So yeah, that's going to be nice. So I can probably sit for hours and talk about all the stuff that's been added, all the tiny features. But as a broad summary, these are some of the advances that have been made since the previous presentation. So I hope you find it interesting. And like I said, we have a website up and running now that represents the project, quartexdeveloper.com. So you can go there and read more about the features. And there's also a forum there. It's we're just getting started, so the forum doesn't have like hundreds or thousands of threads, but there's a few interesting posts there. Also, if you want to back the project and receive like weekly and bi-weekly updates, usually run an update and a new build on weekends. That's sort of the time slot that I can work with this. I have a full-time job, so I can't really sit all day with this. So you can visit Patreon at patreon.com/QuartexNow, and then you can back the project, and then you get access to regular updates, and also you have a possibility to sort of come with good ideas and maybe this should be like so and so, and have a dialogue running. And of course, I help my backers if there's a question. How do I do this? How do I do that? And I try to help them as much as possible. So yeah, it's taking shape. So yeah, well, that's it. I'll go back to the live presentation now. Cheers.
So, and that was the pre-recorded slide, the last slide. If anybody has any questions, then feel free to ask them. So I will be here for a while. So I'm going to check. I noticed that we've had some activity on the chat. What was the website for? Let's see. The business model is around Quartex Pascal. I will start on the top. Oh, we've actually had quite a bit here. see, is there any audio yet? Yeah. For some reason, the audio was a little bit low. I think this video is going to be available later, so it will be easier to simply beef up the volume. So is it similar to the C# delegates? Yes, more or less. You also have operators so that you can use plus and minus to add new delegates. Like the business model, is it open source? No, we tried that. we started with that, but we quickly discovered that it's going to be difficult because people just grab what they want and run with it. So we ended up with a standard vanilla old school shareware license for it. On the benefits, on the positive side, we've sort of set a rule that this system is never going to cost more than $300 for a full version. But the easiest way is simply to back the project. That is the easiest. And I'm going to change some of the the prices that are on the backer stuff. So, for example, $25 a month, that is $300 for a full year. So I want this to be affordable. I want kids, the teenagers, to be able to download this and use it. So it's going to be free for open source projects and non-profit projects, and also free for schools and educational institutions, so that as many as possible can get access to it. What was the website for getting the book? Well, there is no website yet. Like I said, I was just informed that he has started writing this book. I will post as soon as he informs me. I will post that on quartexdeveloper.com so that it is available. It will no doubt be available from his web shop. So I will delegate that as quickly as possible. As a fellow Amiga nut, it's refreshing to see someone bring back its style. Well, yeah, we are everywhere. My favorite Amiga game. Oh God, that is a difficult question. I actually love those click and exploration games like Indiana Jones. What was it called? Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis. That is probably my favorite. And Rocket Ranger and some of the old stuff. Let's see. Can you create an Apache module? No. Node.js provides the server stuff. However, when you run this a Node.js server on Linux, I know that it taps into the underlying HTTP Apache system. On Windows, it will tap into the HTTP Microsoft Internet Information Server module. That is sort of, I think this is a kernel module, so it's really fast. FMsoft Unicode components, essential components. Yeah, so the difference between QTX and Sencha, or UniGUI is actually more correct. UniGUI is a native system. You need Delphi in order to compile a UniGUI application. And once you compile it, you get an executable that has to be executed as a server. You don't need Delphi to use QTX. It's a self-isolated system, and it generates JavaScript. So all you need is Node.js, and you're good to go. So that is the main difference. It doesn't produce native code; it produces JavaScript. So speaking of Sencha, there is actually a wrapper for Sencha components, so you can also use that in QTX. It's an example on how to layer more complex apps, business rule, object model. We have a few examples, but truth be told, I haven't really had time to sit down and write serious demos. Most of the demos that is in the project folder right now are demos based on tests that I've done. So there's that. But I do plan to sit down and write some serious, business examples. Let's see, can it output for Android? Well, it outputs JavaScript, and JavaScript works everywhere. So if you're thinking of generating native Android applications, what you would do is that you would write the application in QTX, and you would take the files that it's generated, and then you would link that together into an executable. There are freely downloadable bundlers, as they are called, which will turn that into a native iOS or Android application, and also Windows and Mac. But I think that if you want native applications, you might want to have a look at Delphi first. Everything in your desktop was written in QTX. Yes, it was. All of it from scratch. That's the whole point of the RTL, to have a system that is as self-contained as possible. The QTX RTL does not depend on any JavaScript libraries or anything like that. That's where the package system comes in. So if you want to use buttons and tabs and stuff like that from, let's say, jQuery or Angular or something like that, you would simply drag and drop that package into the packages folder, and those components become available. Support for T-dataset. I have implemented a T-dataset like component, but direct data binding and those kind of things is scheduled for version 1.1. It's actually really simple to working with databases, but I think you want to wait until we have that as visual components and non-visual components that you can drag and drop. But if you're comfortable working with plain classes, you can use tQTX dataset. That also has filter parsers and things like that. Let's see, is it possible to write a web page application based on HTML, CSS artifacts and use the Pascal to manage? Yes, absolutely. That's the whole point. And add widgets without using the form designer. Yes, you can do it all from code. If you look at the first presentation I had a couple of years ago, before we had the form designer, all of it was done by code. You can also write JavaScript directly if you want to mix and match. So you can simply click new file and JavaScript, and then you can write clean JavaScript there. We have also recycled the ASM keyword. So in Delphi, for example, if you want to sort of do something in assembler and sort of tap out of the Delphi part, you can use the ASM keyword. And we recycle that here. So if you want a JavaScript snippet, you simply use the ASM keyword and then write the JavaScript. And you have access to all the, the variables and the object instance and all of that. See, support for backend servers like Mormot. I hope that we will get this. It should be possible. We added support, or I added support for that with Smart Mobile Studio earlier. I don't see why we shouldn't be able to do that here as well. I mean, Mormot is also incredibly flexible, so I think that's going to show up after people get their hands on it. What tools do you use to develop QTX? Only Delphi. It's all Delphi. Clean Delphi, actually. So I'm actually going to just see if I can click myself out of this. Now suddenly the comments vanished. Chat. Can you convert Delphi form to QTX? No. Delphi forms have a sort of custom file format. I decided to go with JSON for QTX forms. So I'm just going to switch over. Let's see, do that. So I don't have access to my virtual machines. I have Delphi in a virtual machine. Otherwise, I could have shown you, but as you can see from the background here, it's all Delphi. It's all written from scratch in Delphi. The compiler, the IDE, form designer, all of it. There is zero dependencies. The only dependency that we actually have or will have is the rich edits. So other than that, everything is either standard Delphi packages that you can get from the Gettit package manager, and a ton of units written by me. Can we convert BCL components to QTX components? Yes, most of it depends on the code, really. Most of plain Delphi components should be able to be easily converted. There are some differences, like create options and those kind of things, and component state. We call them. We have widget states in the RTL here. So there will be some stuff that needs to be converted. If you create child objects that are child components, for example, you also have to take the async nature of the beast into account. But so far, I haven't really had any problem porting code from Delphi. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Jon.
Yes, thank you.
We've eaten a little bit into the coffee break, and there is a short presentation also from Lachlan about our major sponsor for this year. Great you could make it, especially at such an awkward time for you in Norway. Thanks for the great presentation, and all the questions have shown that the big interest in your tool. I wouldn't be surprised if we may actually discuss later on under ADUG and you if we start on a study group for your tool. Okay, so now the floor is open for Lachlan. Lachlan, are you on the TCG? Oh, yeah, here we are. I make you a co-host so you can share your screen. And before we have,
not going to share screen, Matthias. I'll just talking to the microphone.
Okay,
and got the webcam
on. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm Lachlan. Most people would recognise me from ADUG events and so on, but if you don't, I'm a long-term ADUG member, and I'm part of a company called the Continuity Group. And the Continuity Group is proud to be the major sponsor of this year's ADUG Symposium. Now, the idea behind the Continuity Group was formed back in 2013. Myself, Steve Arena, and Matthias at that time, though Matthias is not directly part of the Continuity Group anymore, but he still works with us on projects. The idea was that, as with the name, the Continuity Group, you've got any group of Delphi developers, there's going to be some of them there who are being asked the question, okay, so you've written this system for us over the last 10, 15 years. What happens if you decide to step back? And a lot of Delphi developers don't have a good answer to that question. We were formed to help you actually have an answer to that question. So if that's something you're being asked, or you would like to do right by your clients and have an answer ready for when the question comes, you should come and speak to us. Alternatively, we also do work with Delphi developers who are just a bit overworked, need some extra help. So we can help with that, or there might be a particular area that they want to expand their project into, but they don't have the expertise. We may have someone who can help you in that area, either show you how to do it or do that part of the project for you. And lastly, I wanted to say that most people who are working with this are actually ADUG members and working. They may have just like a day or two available, and they work on Continuity Group projects in that day or two when there are other stuff on the other days. If that sounds like something that you would be interested in, giving some of your spare time to working on some of these projects we're doing, get in touch with us as well. So thanks everyone for attending the symposium, and thanks very much to the presenters so far. It's been very good. As you can see, I'm in Sydney, and I'm here with the other guys here from Sydney. We hold our ADUG meetings most months. It can be a bit spotty, but we'd love to see some new faces here. So if you're in Sydney and you'd like to come along, please do. We have good meetings, a lot of fun. We go to the pub afterwards usually. So yeah, please get in touch, and we'd love to see you here. So again, I'm Lachlan from the Continuity Group. Just Google the Continuity Group. You should Lachlan, and you should be able to find us, or from via the ADUG forums. You can find me and message me or so on. Or Steve Arena, if you know Steve Arena. Steve Arena is the other director of the continuity group. So thanks very much, guys.